Students, many of us could go home to our countries, but other students had to spend the entire summer, and what a blessed place to stay, but they would have to stay in Medina Munawwara because they had no country to go back to. And I can start naming countries here and there and there. Allahu Ta'ala a'lam of which countries are next. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Musa alayhi salam. فَخَرَجَ مِنْهَا خَائِفًا يَتَرَقَّبُ قَالَ رَبِّ نَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. When they were in search of Musa to kill him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَخَرَجَ مِنْهَا, that he left the town, he left the city, يَتَرَقَّبْ, in fear and apprehension. قَالَ, and then he raised his hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, رَبِّ نَجِّنِي مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الظَّالِمِينَ. O Allah, save me from these oppressive people. And we see that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, even at the beginning of his mission, when he went to Buhayra, and Buhayra said to him that I would have followed you when your people kicked you out of the city. When the people would kick you out of the city, I would follow you at that time. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, are they going to expel me? And he said, yes. Because it has to happen. When someone comes with the truth, this is the way the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala work. They kick them out of the lands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, saying to tell the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam this dua, وَقُلْ رَبِّ أَدْخِلْنِي مُدْخَلَ صِدْقٍ وَأَخْرِجْنِي مُخْرَجَ صِدْقٍ. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and say, O Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, my Lord, أَدْخِلْنِي, enter me into an entrance, a sound entrance and a safe entrance into Medina al-Munawwara, وَأَخْرِجْنِي مُخْرَجَ صِدْقٍ, and let me leave in a sound exit. And this is from Medina al-Munawwara, from Mecca al-Mukarramah, when they expelled the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The third dua is one of the most important dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put on our tongues. And you'll see even in these ad'iyah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us, many of them say, وَقُلْ وَقُلْ وَقُلْ. This dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts directly on our tongues in salah. It's the dua that Allah teaches us for guidance. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to say it. And from His mercy azza wa jal, that He puts it on the tongue of the abd, when they stand up for salah, they say, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. Every single day, again and again and again, O Allah, guide us to the straight path. O Allah, guide us to the straight path. The kuffar, in times like this and even before it, they grow up not calling Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they call other things. They have fountains. When they want to make a dua, they'll take a quarter or they'll take a silver dollar. The more that they pay, basically they're going to get their dua accepted more. They'll go to Rome and they'll find a fountain and they'll do hajj to that pond and that stream and that fountain to throw in their dimes and to throw in their quarters. That perhaps the God of so-and-so and the God of this and the God of that will accept from them. And you know a verse of poetry that you grew up with. This poetry goes to the effect of, when you wish upon a star. And I won't sing it for you, but everyone knows the tune. And every child in here knows the tune of that, when you wish upon a star. And some of them are smiling right now. This is the shirk that they teach us since we are young. And when someone goes to Disneyland or watches TV and says it's only cartoons, from that young age, they're teaching the children this shirk. And they don't even know it, but it's in their mind and it's programmed into their heads. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us day after day to turn in dua, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم, guide us to the straight path. Fourthly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us the dua to our families, to make dua for our families. Of the highest haqq upon us is a dua that we say to our parents, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us and say, رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا, O Allah, have mercy upon them as they raised me when I was young. And in another verse, it's actually a very beautiful verse, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, speaking about the human being. حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغَ أَشُدَّهُ وَبَلَغَ 40 سَنَةً. This ayah is talking about when that person gains their strength and they become 40 years old. And this ayah was emphasized for me in Medina one time when a brother came from the UK and he said, I've turned 40. And then he opened the Qur'an and he said, my friends told me that when I become 40, to open the Qur'an and say this dua. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when they reach the age of 40, قَالَ رَبِّ أَوْزِعْنِي. And the dua says, قال رب أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأصلح لي في ذريتي إني تبت إليك وإني من المسلمين. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when they reach the age of 40, قَالَ رَبِّ أَوْزِعْنِي. He says, oh my Lord, أوزعني, enable me, and أشكر نعمتك, that I'm grateful. Enable me to be grateful to your favor that you bestowed upon me, and the favor from my parents. وَأَنْ أَعْمَلَ صَالِحًا. And that I would do good deeds, of which you approve, and make righteous for me my offspring. وَأَصْلِحْ لِي فِي ذُرِّيَّتِي. And here we also see the dua for the person's children. And in the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he came to Mecca and he left his wife, he said, رَبِّ جَعَلْنِي مُقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ. He made dua for himself, but he didn't stop there. He said, of the things he made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, oh Allah, bless me with the ability to establish the salah. One of those who establishes salah, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِي. And let my children be of those who establish salah. And I want you to compare this to how a parent focuses so much on the dunya of the child. The dunya, the dunya, the dunya. They have to be this, they have to live in this house, they have to have this bank account size. And here is Ibrahim alayhi salam, concerned, will his children be of those who establish salah or not? Fifthly, the fifth dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in the Qur'an, and it's interesting, but it's a dua of public speaking. And they say, and there's very famous polls about this, and they ask people, what do you fear more, death or public speaking? And more people chose public speaking than death. Basically, they're more afraid to stand before other human beings, their boss, than they're afraid to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows that indeed, and in that public speaking comes the da'i who's standing up for the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and teaching it to the people. They may feel shy, going to someone's door, knocking on them, telling them, this is Islam. I'm inviting you to Islam. Many people would be shy to do that. They'll say, no, I'll just leave the pamphlet at the door. Or let me just go away. I don't want to speak. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us the dua of Musa alayhi salam in Surah Taha, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. The dua goes, رب اشرح لي صدري, that my Lord, Ya Rabbi, اشرح لي صدري, expand for me my breast with assurance, ويسر لي أمري, and make easy my task, واحلل عقدة من لساني, and untie the knot from my tongue, يفقه قولي. Sixthly, the sixth dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in the Qur'an. And this is a dua that's very popular when people go for exams. They go for exams, and when you see someone kind of, why are you here in the masjid a little bit more often, they'll say, oh, my final exams are coming up. I'm here to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it may even bring tears in their salah, turning back to Allah Azza wa Jal. And the most important exam that human being will go through is the exam of the hereafter. And so they should be in the masjid day after day, crying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make sure that they pass that exam. And indeed, any college exam, it doesn't matter. A person can pay a little bit more money and take the exam again. But if someone fails the exam of the hereafter, there is no makeup test. There's no retest. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us at the end of Surah Al-Baqarah, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَّسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. Oh Allah, don't take us to account إِن نَّسِينَا, if we forget, أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا, or we make a mistake. And sometimes, dear brothers and sisters, people look at Muslims around them and they see that they may be making mistakes, or they may have forgotten about something, and they may hit them hard with that. But look at the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which He teaches us, because Allah Azza wa Jal knows that we will forget. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows that we will make mistakes. Allah knows it. And so He teaches us to say this dua. When someone sees someone else forgetful or making a mistake, they should also say the dua. Maybe they've forgotten something also. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَّسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. Which brings us to the next dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in the Qur'an, and that is the dua for our Muslim brothers. Dua for our Muslim brothers.